Welcome to Book Passage. As always, we thank you for supporting independent bookstores like this one. If you have a cell phone, if you can check that while I'm doing some housekeeping, make sure it's on silent or turned off, as they say in the movie theaters, unless it's an emergency, it can wait. And you don't want these guys angry with you anyway. So if you haven't had a chance to pick up a copy of David's new book, and we also have, of course, some of his backlists as well as some of Don's books as well, you'll have a chance to do that at any of the registers behind you in about an hour or so after some presentation and some Q&A. And once you pay for them, we'll be putting the table back up here, and the guys will be signing up here on the stage. We want to welcome David Downie back, who's been here for many, many events. I'm sure some of you have seen him before. Introduced David, this guy, Don George, who is a great friend of this store, who is a multi-talented and multi-award-winning travel writer and travel editor. He is also the longtime co-chairman of our summer travel conference, which if any of you are budding travel writers or photographers and would like to find out more about it, it's in our newsletters. There's a pile of them back there on the table, and they're also at all of the registers if you want to find out more about that today. And that's, I think, all that I need to say except to introduce Don George and David Downie.
Thank you, Dana. That was a beautiful introduction. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And thanks for everyone for coming out today on this beautiful day. It's really, really nice to see so many people. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So David is a longtime friend, writer, Parisophile, Europhile. I think we began working together in the early 90s probably, when I was the travel editor at the Examiner Chronicle, and David was sending me beautiful, wonderful, moving, illuminating dispatches from Paris and other parts of Europe, and we've just been in touch and been working together ever since then. So he still lives in Paris most of the year, and then some of the year in Burgundy and some of the year in Italy. So he's definitely an expert on all things European. He's a wonderful, graceful writer. His new book is a beautiful celebration of Paris, which we'll be talking about. And it's just really a pleasure to share a stage with him and to welcome him back to the Bay Area. And so thank you for being here, David.
Thank you, Don. And I just want to reciprocate by saying that it was always not just an honor, but a huge pleasure to work for you. Don has been my boss at many different places.
Yes.
And Don, too, is a wonderful writer, and he's so self-effacing that tonight we are going to break the rules, and I'm going to interview Don. He's going to tell you about his book. Actually, yes, I do want to talk about your book.
Well, we'll talk about both our books then. Well, I thought I would just begin by asking you about the inspiration for your book. The book is right there, A Passion for Paris, Romanticism and Romance in the City of Light. But can you talk about what inspired the book?
Yeah, about 10,000 things. But the most important things, I would say, would be the fact that having lived in Paris now for almost 30 years, really 29 years, I woke up at a certain point a number of years ago and realized that despite my upbringing in San Francisco and hence great sophistication, I had been somehow duped by the Paris myth, and I had fallen for it and believed that this was the most romantic city on earth. Of course, the wonderful thing is that it's sort of like a John le Carre novel or something. I didn't know I was a romantic. So I wanted to investigate this notion of, falling in love with the city and being besotted and winding up there for most of my adult life. Why did it happen to me, and why is Paris this magical city, enchanting city that it is for so many people. The other immediate reason that I decided that I would fling myself at the project was that all of these books kept coming out about French women don't get fat, and French dogs don't litter the sidewalk, French children don't throw food, and then the famous one that French men don't lose their hair, and so I lost my hair. This is very recent, and so part of me kind of rebelled and said, there's got to be more to this than just the wonderfulness of Paris. What is it that makes Paris tick, and why is it so wonderful? So that's what I wanted to do with the book.
Mm. How did you go about investigating that? It's a big topic.
It's huge.
It's a huge topic.
In fact, when I signed the contract, I kind of went, oh, now what?
What have I got myself into?
Yeah, and this just happened to me again now, because I just signed another contract for a new book on Paris.
Oh, wow.
And boy, I don't know how I'm going to do that. And the time it's allotted. But,
What's the new book? Not to divert the conversation, but just what's the...
The new book is a history of the Parisian love affair with food.
Oh, that's easy.
Yeah, 2,000 years of food.
Wow.
Written in a memoir in the same way this book is constructed, if you could call it constructed. I mean, this is mimetic prose in that I decided that I would focus on the Romantic period, largely the 19th century, because that was the heyday of Paris. And that is when really the culture and the mentality, the mindset, the modern literature, so many things, most of the architecture, a lot of the city planning, all of these things that we associate with Paris and its attractions and its romantic qualities came online. Paris was also the caput mundi, it was the center of the universe at that time. And so the more I read about romance and the appeal of Paris, the more I kept falling back into the 19th century. So I decided to go back and read all of the great romantic writers who were such an influence on the modern French psyche, and then put together their lives and follow them through the city. And it just so happened that, I wove my life very immodestly into the lives of these romantics, in that I tell you the story of how I set about researching the book and the things I discovered and the places I went. So some people are saying that you can use this book as a guidebook to Paris and walk around with it, and that could be, that would be sort of going the opposite way that I went, but that's okay.
Right. So you focused on the 19th century, and you focused on great writers.
And artists,
yeah.
Musicians.
And how did that journey unfold? What did you begin to discover, and how did the sort of pieces begin to come together for you?
Well, I had a notion before I started that France still lives in the 19th century. That essentially, and this from earlier stories of mine that you've read in my book, Paris, Paris, one of the, people that say, what's your favorite chapter? Well, they're all my favorites, right? But there was one I wrote about why the year 1900 lives on.
Yeah.
And I came up with this notion of a Janus city that looks forward and backwards. And so I went into that and developed a whole book out of it, essentially. That's what I was trying to do. The other thing is that when you live in Paris, you realize that the greats are constantly in the news. I mean, the French have a highly developed sense of history and their culture and their love of language, and they're so literate, their high school corresponds to our AA degree, but it's infinitely more rigorous and difficult, and they're very literate, they're great readers. So they're steeped in this culture. And the imprimatur of that period is on every French man, woman, and child. So I dug, and the more I dug, the more I found that, guess what? These people live on, and they live on in the French. And there is a reason why Paris has remained so intact compared to so many other modern capitals. Beyond the fact that it wasn't bombed, which is important for a European city, but speculators tore down most of our city centers. England, lots of English cities were either damaged in the war or ravaged by real estate developers and so on. And the French, while they've not been perfect, but they've done more to preserve Paris. And again, this all goes back to the 19th century. For example, I discovered that Victor Hugo, everyone thinks of Victor Hugo with the Hunchback of Notre Dame, right? Well, in the 1820s, when he was very young, he wrote a pamphlet called Guerre aux démolisseurs, a war on the demolition men. And it is one of the early documents, if not the first, certainly in France, of historic preservationism. So the notions of what were needed to preserve the Gothic heritage of Paris, for example, come from that book. That's just it's a little pamphlet. And on and on. I mean, young French people today, well, some Baudelaire forwards and backwards. Well, they learn Baudelaire by heart still, and they go to his grave and they leave tokens and they leave notes, and they it's a militantly secular society, but they pray to the poet to intervene in their sexual affairs and everything else, especially sex with Baudelaire, which is another very interesting chapter.
Indeed.
And I talk about it a great deal in the book. In fact, let me show you. This is what I call my Baudelaire bag.
Your Baudelaire bag.
Yeah, Don doesn't know about this.
I do not.
This, people talk about sexual aids. These are visual aids.
Okay.
So this is
Can we hold anything or?
this is a bag that Allison, my wife, bought at the Paris Book Fair, which happened just before. And, it says, "Le beau est toujours bizarre." The beautiful is always strange, or beautiful is bizarre. Okay, so he was picking up on something that Victor Hugo had said earlier on, because Victor Hugo was the trendsetter. Victor Hugo said, "The beautiful is ugly, and ugly is beautiful." And there's a famous caricature of him riding a horse with this big banner fluttering behind that says, "The beautiful is ugly, and ugly is beautiful." And all of the French artists and writers and following behind him into the new world, into modernity. Because that's the other thing. Most people don't realize that the Romantic movement was the modern movement. People think it started with Hemingway and Gertrude Stein. It started 100 years earlier. And Hugo uses the term. Baudelaire uses it in the 1850s.
The modern.
Yes, modern times, Romanticism was a modernist movement. It was an anti-classical movement. And here's another thing from my bag of tricks. Just before we left, as I say, there was a big Paris book fair, and Le Figaro littéraire, which is the literary supplement to the Figaro newspaper, which has been in publication for over 200 years, and just about everyone in my book worked for the Figaro. It's extraordinary. So
It is extraordinary. Yeah, it's amazing.
They did a poll of the French to see who are the most popular writers, and guess who won? Victor Hugo.
Really, Victor Hugo.
Today.
Wow.
He died in 1885, and he's still alive today. He's quoted all the time by the press, because Victor Hugo was not only a great poet, novelist, and playwright, he was also a senator. He was a peer and then a senator, and he was so progressive. He was a feminist, an abolitionist. He was for universal suffrage. He tried to create the United States of Europe, and on and on and on. And then, you know, because you just would know because you're a man of the world, the real reason why he's the hero of the French.
He was a good lover.
He was a world-class philanderer.
That's what I read.
And so guess who one of the other heroes or heroines of the French is? His main squeeze, his mistress of 52 years, but she was only one of many. She was the official mistress. So he had his wife, his official mistress, then he had another rival mistress who was kind of a sub-mistress.
Wow.
And then he had all of these dancers and artists and models and writers, because there were all these women writers, and they were flinging themselves at him.
Wow.
And we had the privilege at the Victor Hugo Museum of seeing his personal notebooks, which are not, available to the public. We had to wear white gloves, and our archivist opened each page for us, and I was there just reading and looking at it. And when he was 80, he died at 83, which was very old in his days. In his last 5 months, I think, I can't remember, 5 months, he had 3 different lovers.
I wonder if he died.
I think it kept him down. Anyway, so no joke. I mean, on and on. The other guy here on the cover of this is Marc Lévy, and he's the top-selling novelist in France, sells millions of copies, and he's a neo-romantic. He writes romantic books, meaning romantic with a capital R, from the Romantic period. And the title of his current bestseller is Elle et lui. You remember Elle et lui?
No.
You didn't read Elle et lui?
I did not.
I'm choqué. Elle et lui was the great pseudo-confessional novel by Georges Sand about her famous affair with de Musset.
Right.
Alfred de Musset, the poet. This was the great Romeo and Juliet story.
Right.
And so she writes this thing which is unreadable today, and totally a reinterpretation of history. And because if you go back and read all of the accounts of it, I mean, she was a number, Georges Sand. Anyway, so his current novel has the same title, and it's basically the same story told in a 21st century vein.
Yeah, interesting.
So when people say, why did I write this book? It's about the French today.
Today, right.
It's a book of history and a light memoir, and it's a romp. It's amusing, but it's really about the soul of the Parisians today.
So studying the 19th century is really studying the 21st century.
Absolutely.
Wow.
21st, yes.
Yeah. What was a big surprise for you in the course of the research that you were doing? I suspect there were a few, but what was one that comes to mind?
Well, the number of women that Victor Hugo slept with. I mean, talk about feeling inadequate. Sarah Bernhardt was one.
Really?
Yeah, she was about, I think, 50 years his junior, and she resisted his advance. Maybe it was 40. And she called him the monster, le monstre. And then she said, oh, he was so charming. And she gave in.
Wow.
All of them. But beyond that, I mean, there were
So you should have a book about Victor Hugo, it sounds like.
Well, I actually pitched it to my editor, and who knows? I may do a book about the great women romantics of the 19th century, but that all depends. You know, if you all rush over there and buy a copy of my book and it becomes a bestseller, maybe I'll get a contract. Otherwise, they're skeptical.
You have a sacred obligation now, I think.
But one of the surprising things I discovered, the many things, just in terms of the physical layout of the city and the thing is how much is there from the 19th century. I mean, everyone knows Paris is an old city, right? And that building where we live is about 400 years old, and it's a modern building in Paris is from the time of Haussmann, so 150 or 60 years. But theaters, restaurants, venues of all kinds, they're still there. That's what's astonishing. And the fact that, you know, the cafes even, the lifestyle, if you changed slightly the clothes that the Parisians wear today, I mean, everyone wears black still. And that was something that Alfred de Musset wrote about. He said that the 19th century was the first period without its own style, that it was living a series of revivals. I mean, what could be more modern? So they revive things, often mixing and matching troubadour styles and things like that. It was really wacky. Bohemianism was born in Paris in the 1820s. We think of Bohemians as the guys in San Francisco, right? And they didn't even know that they were living in a revival. And on and on. These are so many surprising things. A final really surprising thing, Georges Sand, you all know who she was, the great proto-feminist, a very prolific writer, wrote about 80 novels, pressed this sprawling 5-volume autobiography, which is an amazing work of hagiography and self-promotion and rewriting of history. But she's a goddess still to the French. And there is an association of Les Amis de Georges Sand, and they are known as Sandistes. They know everything she said or wrote or thought, all the tens of thousands of letters she wrote, which were often heavily redacted. And this association, the headquarters are in the Museum of Romantic Life. If you've never been to
There's a Museum of Romantic Life?
Yes, and it is the most romantic place in Paris. And it has this incredible cafe in the garden, and you go into the house where she used to hang out. She didn't live there. It was the house where Henri Scheffer, the painter, lived. He was this great romantic painter. And you see her mementos and memorabilia and everything else, and his, and all this wonderful stuff. And even the dust motes are romantic. But I queried this woman who's an expert in these things romantic, and she has put online all 22,000 letters that Juliette Drouet, who was Victor Hugo's mistress, wrote to Victor Hugo. They are online. She's read every one. There are endnotes for every single letter that Juliette.
22,000.
22,000. And so I started asking. I had an email dialogue with this woman, and you could tell that she was living in sort of reincarnating Juliette Drouet, and so defensive of her and everything else that it made my flesh creep. I interviewed the archivist at the Victor Hugo Museum, and I said at a certain point, because I'd been talking to all this, do you have the impression that the Romantic Age is recent? She said, "Oh, oui, mais oui. Ça continue." It's like, it was yesterday. And that, I think, I had a sense of this when I really researched. I fell into it and discovered that, man, this is it. We're not in the 21st century,
Right.
Not in Paris.
Right, that's great. Just listening to you makes me, because one of the things I try to get at is, because as you know, Paris had that effect on me. I fell in love with the world in Paris. And one of the things I try to get at is why? What was that all about? I mean, I know some things, like there was that woman I met, for example. That was wonderful, but I was young and impressionable and just sort of spreading my wings. But But I remember the sensation that I was literally walking through history when I would walk through Paris in a way that you don't get in a lot of cities, because you said there's been a lot of demolition and change, but in Paris you're walking through the 19th century very often wherever you are. And as you say, that so much of life still made to the restaurants and the theater. I mean, but the way you just put it really helped put it in perspective for me, that I was feeling that romantic vision and that romantic presence right now in Paris.
Yeah.
If I go back tomorrow, I'll still
Yes.
feel that. It's
Yes.
still there.
And you know what you don't realize? And this is a compliment. You write in a 19th century style. You do. You are a lyrical writer. You are a neo-romantic, and you don't even know it. That's why I love Don's writing. Honestly, you have more in common with an Alfred de Musset, who was a very fine writer, by the way, than you do with, I don't know, one of the minimalists
Right.
who writes here today. Because you have this sensibility in a lyrical way of looking at the world. And in fact, in this book, in Don's anthology, Don collected all of these distinguished writers. I don't know how I got in there. But, in your anthology, I contributed a chapter, and it's about my first time in Paris.
You should tell that story because that's
1976.
amazing.
No, I'm not going to tell that story.
It's a good story.
No, because I want you to tell us about your contribution.
Well, I love your story. You should, if you don't buy the book, at least read David's story. Stand in a corner and read his story. It's really wonderful. It's about how he first went to Paris. Sort of a rainy, gray drizzle. I mean, everything was sort of going wrong, and he ended up moving into this place, and the surprise that he discovered,
Don't
which I
give
won't
that
give away, this surprise that he discovered about where he had ended up living just by chance is really extraordinary. I get goosebumps even right now thinking about it.
Yeah, well, one day they'll put a plaque on that building. When there's already a plaque on the building. There wasn't when I lived there, which is why I didn't know anything about it, because I was such an ignoramus. And when I was 18, I did not, what did I know? And that was
It's pretty great.
that was the funny thing.
There'll be a plaque on your home too, I'm sure.
Oh,
David Downie, aka Victor Hugo of the 21st century.
right, exactly. You mean where I was born in San Francisco?
Right. One of the things I love about your book is that, and it comes across just hearing you speak now, it's just the passion that you feel. And I'm suspecting that as a 3-decade resident of Paris, you probably haven't always been infatuated with Paris. I'm sure there's been, as with all relationships, the good times and the bad times, and the good times and the bad times, but I feel like you rediscovered, or you went a few layers deeper with your love for Paris in this book. Would you say that that's true?
Yes, I'd like to hire you after this. This is wonderful. Yeah, I mean, I, as you know, I lived in Rome for a couple of years in the 1960s when my mother, who was Roman, decided to move our family back there from San Francisco. And I fell in love with Rome. Rome is the other city for me. I mean, I love Rome. But there's what they have in common, other than their Roman origins, because Paris was a fairly important provincial Roman city, not huge, but, is the fact that they are both layer cake cities. They're millefeuille, and you can live in them on many levels simultaneously. And the wonderful thing about both those cities is that the more you know about them, the more you enjoy them. So you go to Paris as a young, callow person, and you walk around and, hey, isn't this wonderful? And I can sit in a cafe and I'm 18 and I can get drunk on cheap wine, and and all of these, oh look, they make sandwiches out of entire baguettes, or whatever it is that rings your bell. It can be very superficial. In fact, I think most people's appreciation of these cities is is fairly skin deep because they don't spend enough time there. But you know, you live there over a period of decades and you want to know more because the baguette is swell, but you know, after a while you want to know how the foie gras was made or whatever. And so the layering, and so what happens to me is I go into the past because I want to know where these things came from. That's what fascinates me. I may be mistaken, and maybe things just come from nowhere and drop out of the sky, but I don't think so, and especially in these ancient cities. So yes, my relationship has run hot and cold. It runs very cold, ironically, or paradoxically, when it's extremely hot in Paris and polluted and noisy, for example. Like I can't stand being there in July. There are times when the exuberance of the nightlife makes me very unhappy. There are times when I don't understand, as someone who grew up here, you know, sun-drugged and full of vitamin D and lived in Rome where the people are very welcoming, and why sometimes the Parisians can be very snippish and difficult. But you know, it's inevitable. It's a love-hate relationship, and I think that that is true with most profound relations. Maybe not hate, but you know, you go up and down. Interestingly enough, in my book, I quote Georges Sand, who moved from the countryside into Paris and lived there most of her adult life. She went back and forth, and she says exactly the same thing. That she's driven mad by noisy neighbors and things like that. And so everyone who's, you know, constantly over the moon about Paris, you know, it's like, oh, let me click a love lock on your arm because you were in Paris. Everything, you know, okay, you know, wake up. You know, I don't even know how they say Kool-Aid in French. I'll show you another last thing from my bag of tricks.
Wow.
I've got lots, but I won't. But this one we've got to talk about. It's been in the news. NPR, New York Times.
Really?
Yeah. So just before we left town, Alice and I go for a walk every morning, right? And we're often walking down the Seine. And so we're walking along and thud. I'm getting there. This hits my shoulder.
Oh, wow.
From one of the Lovelock bridges.
Right.
Okay? So there are these bridges in Paris that are encrusted, covered with actually millions of locks. And you know, each one weighs quite a bit. Feel this. So you figure that I think
It says forever on it.
that's it. So this is the thing. What they don't know is there's something called divorce.
And gravity.
And so the other thing is that I don't think a single one of these locks was put on there by a Parisian. They're all foreigners. And there are huge, huge droves of Asians, Chinese who fly over, and they get married in Paris, not officially, but
Right.
and they stand on these bridges with the locks, or down below where you can see the bridges with the locks, and they get their pictures taken, and it's this huge tourist attraction. And of course, it's destroying the bridges, and it's a hazard to navigation because the locks are falling on people in the tour boats, the bateau mouche, or on people walk. And you know what they don't tell you? Yeah, this says forever, and it's 2014. This says Christine and Yuan. Okay? So what they don't tell you is that all these lovers flock there during the day, and it's all hunky-dory, you know? and then when, you know, breaking up is hard to do, right? They come back at night with bolt cutters after.
Really?
Yeah, and they
To
ring.
save the bridges.
No, these are people breaking up.
No.
What do you do when you break up or you get divorced?
Seriously?
Yes. The bolt cutters of the city is removing them, but the people who are pissed off because, Christine has been sleeping
Forget
with
forever.
Jack or something.
Right.
So forever is,
Oh.
is relative.
Well,
So yeah, and the other, the other thing is part of the ritual is to, you lock your lock on, and it's that they're usually key locks, but some of them are combination. You lock your lock on, and then you have a key on, sometimes on a keychain like this one, which is now a broken up Eiffel Tower, and you lock it and you throw it. And guess what? It lands on someone on a boat or on the sidewalk or whatever. So, this has become and the Parisians hate it. You see, this is the thing, all these people from abroad love it. And we were there, and there was a young French person who had, out of disgust, in French, had written, sprayed on the bridge, "Love in chains is not love." But he wrote it in French, and so no one understood.
wow. I don't quite know where to go from. I'm still thinking about Christine and Yuan. I'm so sorry if it just didn't work out. Is there a place, if we all were to go to Paris tomorrow, and that's why don't we all just go to Paris tomorrow? Is there a place that you would send us to really get that sense of 19th century romantic Paris, par excellence?
Yes. No question, absolutely. It is the time tunnel in Paris, Père Lachaise Cemetery,
Oh, wow.
which is, I think, the most exquisite cemetery in the world. I've not been everywhere in the world, but of all the cemeteries I've seen, it's the most magical. And there are special parts of it that are even more magical than the rest. And in fact, it is the third most popular destination on my tours, because I take people on custom tours. And it's amazing how many people want to go to the cemetery. I write about it in the book. It was one of the first places I went to and was really enchanted by, and started to have these heebie-jeebie feelings about, these people are talking to me, and believe me, I'm not a believer. So, but you really have this sense of being in that other layer. It's just amazing. I think if you had to write, one of those New York Times bestseller one-line things about, and boy, I would like to see that written about my book. I think it's really about spirit of place.
Just to stay in Père Lachaise for a second, what's the corner of Père Lachaise that you would most gravitate towards? Is there a particular tomb or a particular part of because it's a big cemetery.
It is
vast, sprawling.
It's huge. Yes. It's the romantic corner of the great romantics where Balzac is buried, and Delacroix, and Nodier. Now you don't probably know who Nodier was. Well, Charles Nodier, was the librarian of the Arsenal Library in Paris, which is where French Romanticism was born in the 1820s. And he was a novelist himself and a writer of short stories, great stuff. And it was really thanks to him that the whole notion of bohemianism was born. He was anything but a bohemian. He was very bourgeois, and he was in charge of the Royal Library at the Arsenal. However, he was a great lover of Lawrence Stern, who's one of my favorite authors. And he discovered in this very bizarre book by Lawrence Stern this reference to the King of Bohemia. And it's this surreal passage in Lawrence Stern, which then gave rise to the notion of bohemianism. And it all started in this place that you can still go to today. He's buried up there. almost directly across from Balzac, and Gérard de Nerval, who was a very fine writer, also of short stories and novels, died very young, committed suicide, tragically, and in a very grisly way. He's buried right there, too. And around the corner from him is Delacroix, who's one of the various casts, the heroes of my book, the romantic painter.
Have you left a note on any tomb? Or any?
Yes, I keep saying, give me a bestseller.
Dear Baudelaire, please.
Yes, yes. Well, Baudelaire is amazing. As I was telling you earlier at the book festival, because we already did this once today.
Right. Not exactly this.
Not this. No, no. We were in a group of very distinguished people. But Baudelaire became obsessed with Edgar Allan Poe.
Right.
And a lot of people don't realize that even the title of his most famous book, The Flowers of Evil, doesn't come from Poe, but it comes from Hawthorne.
I didn't know that.
Well, I'm not going to tell you about it if you gotta read the book. You read the book and you don't remember it. Baudelaire, who wrote The Flowers of Evil and a zillion essays, he was an art critic also, and a poet, translated the entire opus of Edgar Allan Poe. And here's another funny thing about the French that I discovered. They have read Edgar Allan Poe backwards and forwards, thanks to Baudelaire. And if you think that the young Parisians are warped, because they're very, they're into pessimism and negativity, they're the opposite of California, you can attribute it in part to Baudelaire and Edgar Allan Poe. Baudelaire dressed like him and behaved like him and tried to incarnate Edgar Allan Poe. And the French don't call him Edgar Allan Poe. You know what they call him? Edgar Poe. No Allan.
He's become French.
Edgar Poe. You mean Edgar Allan Poe, the American? Oh, no.
No. Like Jerry Lewis.
Yeah, they can have Jerry Lewis.
Well, let me see if anyone in the audience has a question for David about Paris, his book, or whatever you might want to ask. Any questions in the audience? Do we have some Paris files? Yeah.
I'm going back over Thanksgiving just for 4 days with my cousin from Florida who has never been. And I said, what do you want to see? Well, the Louvre, of course, and Versailles. I said, no, that's another trip. And I said, the Louvre you do on your own. But I want some really good suggestions that'll satisfy me as well as a newbie.
Well, I do
He does a tour.
I do consulting. It really depends entirely on what you're interested in, what you like, what you don't like, how mobile you are, how much
You like to
money
walk,
you want
a
to
walking.
spend.
I just walk.
Yeah. Well,
Great.
I do walks and walking tours, and the favorite places are the Marais, Latin Quarter, and Saint-Germain-des-Prés, and then, as I said, the cemetery. You don't have to know anything about Paris or history or literature to enjoy that cemetery. It's
I've been
amazingly
there.
beautiful.
It's like, yeah, but I don't need to go back.
Oh, okay.
And it's, it's not that close into town.
I'd say the Marais is a really fantastic area to wander around. And I like Ile Saint Louis a lot too,
Yeah,
just wandering Ile
you
Saint
can walk
Louis.
around the East End very easily.
And Montmartre.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're all good.
Montmartre, I would go
Can't miss.
at dawn.
Dawn in Montmartre.
Yeah, seriously.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me, I was in Paris 2 years ago, and it was at a time when people were talking about the parks of Paris and how some of the mayors in the past have made sure that there's a special place in every park for every couple or to design parts of parks to have it be a special place for the residents. And did you find that was a piece of the puzzle as far as romance in Paris, the parks?
Yeah, I think the parks are absolutely part of the equation. I, as Don knows, love the Luxembourg Garden.
I was just thinking of that.
Above all, I think it is, again, the most exquisite park anywhere. I love, in Rome, I love Cathedral Borghese, for example. I think it's a wonderful place. However, the Luxembourg Garden, it's small, it's wonderful, and it has something for everyone. And light, shade, symmetry, or the rambling romantic garden, that kind of thing. The Second Empire parks, mostly from the 1860s, early 1860s, built for the 1867 Universal Exposition, are also wonderful. Definitely Butte Chaumont is fabulous. It was built into a former quarry. And that's one of the most romantic places in Paris. So yes, the parks are definitely part of the magic spell, because I think nature has an awful lot to do with this feeling of romance. And romance in my book is not just about kissy, love. It's about enchantment and magic, because if you look up the definition of romance, you will see that down the list, it's really about enchantment and magic, and that's what my book's about. My book isn't a kind of soft porn, where to kiss in Paris book. That actually exists. There's a little guidebook to where to kiss in Paris.
Written by Victor Hugo.
Updated recently.
One of the favorite stories David ever wrote for me was a wonderful, wonderful piece when I was the travel editor at the paper called "A Day in the Life of the Luxembourg Garden." And I still think of that as one of the best travel stories I ever published. It's just getting up at dawn and sort of watching what happens in the garden during the course of a day, and you can pretty much understand Parisian life by spending a day in the garden. It's really...
Yeah, and I stand by it. My one regret with the Luxembourg Garden is that the wonderful 19th century iron, bent wrought iron chairs that they had have been removed and replaced for practical purposes by sturdier iron chairs, which in 100 years will be okay. They're too new for me right now.
Other Paris questions? Anyone? Yes.
If you happen to be traveling to Paris in July, when you mentioned that it's hot and smoky, do you have any tips for nice places to go in July?
Inside.
Somewhere inside, I don't know.
Well, go to all the parks and walk along the Seine.
Yeah.
One of the wonderful things that the last mayor did is he got rid of a section of the expressway on the left bank, so you can now walk on the left bank all the way across Paris without cars, which is absolutely wonderful. By the way, right now it's frying hot in Paris. It's in the 90s.
Really?
Which is unusual. I mean, it goes up and down, but generally there are 2 or 3 weeks in July that are unbearably hot.
That's when I'll be there probably.
But it's unusual for June.
Yeah. What would you say? What are the best months to be in Paris?
Well, it depends. I actually like winter. Winter is the only time when there's a slight lull in tourism. Paris is absolutely besieged. And the most wonderful months in terms of the climate are the ones that are packed with people. So, April, May, June, September, October are the nicest months to be there, like for most places, but they're besieged. So I have come to really appreciate the cold weather. which I actually do like.
Hmm.
Rome too, by the way. I think the best month for Rome is February. So go in the quote-unquote off-season, which is no longer an off-season. It's just a a slight
A less
dip.
on season.
Yeah.
David, the book sounds like it was just beautifully researched. How long did it take you to write?
Oh dear. It depends how you count it. Because I read Madame Bovary when I was a teenager, for example. So I was in Paris for the first time aged 18. And I think I could not have written the book without digesting all of these decades of reading and research. However, the actual book, between researching the proposal and writing it and then writing the book and getting it to the publisher, I had to do in under 18 months. And you can ask my wife what it did to me. See, there's something called return on investment. And
I have heard of this.
the real publishing world of New York, when you work for a mainstream publisher and they give you an advance, they want the product delivered in 1 year. So from the time you sign the contract, unless you're extraordinarily famous and sure to give them a big bestseller, then they want it very quickly. So it was a lot of work that I had to do much faster than I wanted to. However, I think that it probably, in a strange way, improved the book. Because it's like certain, romantic painters too. Delacroix, I was talking about Delacroix. If you go to the Delacroix Museum, National Museum, near Saint-Germain-des-Prés, you can look at his paintings, his oil paintings, and you see them in the Louvre and all over. They're in American collections too. He belabored them. He worked on them over and over, and they're incredible. I mean, some people love them. Some of them I like. Some of them I love. Many of them I don't. But his sketches are fabulous. And on all the things that he just sat down and did them. Same with Moreau, Gustave Moreau, if you want to, that's a discovery, and I wrote about Gustave Moreau for you too, about 25 years ago. Another great symbolist writer of the painter of the 19th century, who was fabulous with his sketches, and his paintings are like, so keep
I wanted to know if you have always spoken French. Can you live there without speaking very good French?
Oui, je suis
Oui.
né comme ça, je ne parle français. No, I broke my backside, to put it politely, learning. I studied French from a very early age, as we all did once upon a time, and it was not a language that I took to naturally because my mother's Italian and I also grew up more or less bilingual. And Italian was a meaty language that was phonetic, and I could get my teeth and little claws into it. And French was more difficult in a way because it was like English, where you have all these homonyms and silent consonants especially that trip you up. And so I struggled with it, and when I first got there in 1976, speaking Italian and Spanish, which I've completely lost in the interim, I tried to speak French to people, and it came out sounding like what they call the proverbial Spanish cow. Oui, on parle comme ça avec un accent un peu italien. So, can you live there? It depends how thick your wallet is.
And your skin.
And your skin, and how they're very proud of their language. And if you can stand having people's face, go like this. I mean, they're much more understanding now than they used to be. They're actually sent to charm school, you know that? Yes, there have been 3 major campaigns where You know, they go out and they collar the grumpiest waiters and hostesses and things like that and drag them into school and teach them. And they stimulate them and they give them vitamin D and antidepressants. And you know, they're really not made for it. So the zygomatic muscles are underdeveloped. But honestly, when you know, I talk about it a lot in the book, that optimism is not something that you want to display in Paris. And, you know, it's like, oh, oui, tout va bien. And they look at you.
What's wrong with
This guy's an idiot. An ignoramus. It's an old culture. They're used to things going wrong.
Exactly.
Also, I understood when I was researching this book, I found something else that was really amusing. This ingrained negativity of the French actually is attributed by some sociologists to the ancient Greeks and passed on by the Romans, because guess what? If you boasted, if you were too happy, if you showed too much enthusiasm, you made the gods envious. And so you were not supposed to do that because you would be punished. And in fact, if you read Balzac on that level, Balzac wrote 120 novels, 100 novels in the Human Comedy series. One of the things that runs through them all is never be happy and optimistic and show that everything's okay, because guess what?
Really?
Destiny, fate is going to get you. And no joke, this is something that's buried, it's a very deep vein buried in the French.
That's fascinating. Wow.
So can we go have drinks?
So I have one final, oh, sorry? Yes.
This is a little, I'm obsessed with going to Paris. I don't believe, I love the architecture, I love the art, I love the literature, I love the way it looks, I love everything. I'm not a Francophile, I mean, I'm not, but I keep wanting to go back there, and I was wondering, tell me why I'm doing that.
I think Dawn should read it. My one word is, have you read Chekhov? You know, did they ever make it to Moscow?
Yeah, I think that, I just think there's some spirit in Paris that calls people back. Once you've been infected by Paris, there's nothing that quite meets it in a lot of ways. I suffer the same malady, and I just, there's something I find there that I don't find anywhere else. And even though my life as a travel writer has taken me all around the world to all sorts of fabulous places, there's some quintessential spirit in Paris, and it has a lot to do with romance. I think an enchantment, which is a great word for Paris, that is magic. There's just magic there that I don't find anywhere else. And part of it's reconnecting with me, who was 19, 20, 21 when I was first there, and I meet that person again, and I fall kind of in love with that person who is young and open to the world, and then I fall in love with the France that I've been studying, and then I fall in love with the France that I discovered, and it all comes together. So perhaps we share the same malady.
That's a very good explanation. The other problem is I feel guilty. I feel I should feel that way about New York City, where I was born, or San Francisco, where I have lived, but I don't feel that way about those.
That's okay.
I have a corrective. Leave San Francisco for a while, for a number of years, and live in New York, and then you come back to San Francisco and you're clanging away for the fog.
I have one last question. We're going to sign our books. David's wonderful book. I have a lovely book that I love very much. It's called An Innocent Abroad. That's a collection of tales from great writers like Richard Ford and Anne Patchett and David Downie and lots of wonderful people about their experiences of innocence in a foreign country and how it became a vehicle for transformation and discovery and connection. They're all original stories that never appeared anywhere else, and I love that book, and so perhaps you're inspired by that book as well as David's beautiful book. But one last question for you before we sign our books. What was the most precious lesson that you took away from doing this book?
remain open to the world and to experience, and you will discover the most amazing things. Because I discovered so many things delving into the past and exploring this world of the romantics and making the connections to this day that I had no idea what I would find when I set out to do the book. And I think that if you come to a place with too many preconceptions, you will be the poorer for it. And if you just open yourself up and let things happen and stumble around and discover things, then you will really enrich yourself. And so don't go to Paris with prejudices, because God knows you might walk through the city, spend your entire time there, and just meet the most courteous, wonderful people, and you've been told by everyone that the Parisians are nasty. But then you actually might have the opposite experience.
Thank you very, very much for taking us.